At 60% complete, Bob Dutko, Christian radio talk show host and apologist, is rapidly losing space to give any evidence whatsoever for his God's existence. We've already explored physics and biology, mathematics, and logic, and yet so far his attempts have been miserable failures. In his seventh attempt to provide evidence for God's existence, Dutko believes the Bible itself holds the key. He claims that science actually confirms the Bible and gives a smattering of examples, which we'll examine momentarily. But before I do, I want to note a common tactic used by apologists. They announce a special reading of some scriptural verse which they claim backs up some pet theory they want to advance. But they rarely develop their assertions, provide any supporting evidence, or examine contrary opinions. It's as if they believe if they announce this is how the Bible is to be read, then it's their way or the highway, as if no one else can offer a contrary or differing opinion. It really is the height of arrogance, and I personally run into it time and time again. And Bob Dutko is no exception. His first so-called scientific confirmation of something from the Bible proceeds as follows.
Do you know that when the book of Isaiah was written, the common understanding at that time was that the earth was flat? No one had any concept that the earth was round. But guess what? In Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22, we are told that the earth is a sphere.
Well, guess what again? The passage to which Dutko refers from the biblical book of Isaiah says nothing about the earth being a sphere. The word used there in Isaiah 40:22 means round, as in a dinner plate. The writer of Isaiah had no better understanding of the true shape of the earth than anyone else alive in his culture. But not so the Greeks. That particular passage from Isaiah is believed to have been written sometime in the 6th century BCE. However, Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato in the same time period accurately surmised that the earth was round. Sometime around 240 BCE, the Greek mathematician Eratosthenes estimated Earth's circumference using the different angles of shadow made at two different locations in Egypt, Syene and Alexandria.
How would you set about to measure the Earth with the mathematical knowledge and tools you already possess? A Greek named Eratosthenes did it 240 years before Christ. He was head of the great library of Alexandria in Egypt, a city built by the Greeks. He, like others, suspected that the world was round. After all, the sun and the moon were round. He had also noticed that the sun's rays fell in parallel lines. Greeks before him had divided the circle into degrees and had measured angles. With this information and a logical mind, he measured the earth. Here is how. While visiting the city of Syene one midsummer's day, Eratosthenes noticed that the reflection of the sun could be seen in the bottom of a deep well. The sun was overhead, and the rays pointed to the center of the earth. He remembered this, and on the next midsummer's day in Alexandria, he measured the shadow cast by an obelisk. Sunbeams travel in parallel lines, so the difference in angle had to result from the curvature of the earth. If the angle was 1/50th of a circle, then the distance around the world must be 50 times the distance from Alexandria to Syene. With these simple tools, Eratosthenes made this almost exact measurement of the world more than 1,700 years before Magellan sailed around it.
Eratosthenes had no trouble reporting what he learned, plainly, not tucked into some obscure verse in a book of prophecy using a word for a circle instead of a sphere. And Eratosthenes wasn't operating under divine inspiration. How was he able to get it right without any ambiguity, while the author of Isaiah held to the conventional wisdom of a flat, disc-shaped earth? How is that supposed to be evidence not just of omniscient divine inspiration, but of a God at all? Next, Dutko tries to convince us of the Bible's amazing scientific accuracy by claiming,
You know, when Jeremiah was written, The conventional wisdom of the day, science of the day, taught that there were only 1,100 stars. However, Jeremiah 33:22 says that the number of stars are incalculable.
And how is a poetic verse written by a non-scientist supposed to be proof of scientific accuracy? I've been camping in the Colorado high country, far away from any city lights, and when I look up, I'd be hard-pressed to guess how many stars I could see above me in the dome of the sky. It quite literally looks limitless, and if I were trying to convey a number beyond imagination, I would very well use the stars as a simile.
Do you know during the time the book of Job was written, no one had any clue, science had no clue whatsoever at the time, that the earth was actually floating in space. Yet guess what? You see in Job 26, verse 7, that the earth free floats. It's suspended upon nothing. This is what we're told in Job. How do they know that?
This is more of a theological assertion, much like that found in the creation story of Genesis, in which rival gods from neighbors are cast aside by the Hebrew writers. Instead of the earth being supported by divinities, the author of Job merely has it supported by nothing. But is that really what the Bible as a whole teaches? No. Speaking of Genesis, the earth actually came up out of water, and many other verses describe the earth resting on pillars or a foundation. Just because the Bible doesn't indicate the earth being held up by some divinity doesn't mean it is scientifically accurate. Indeed, to assert that the earth is held up by nothing isn't accurate either. Gravity, a very real force, and certainly not nothing, plays a particularly large role.
Do you know at the time the book of Hebrews was written, science had no knowledge whatsoever of atoms. They had no knowledge that all of creation were made up of invisible elements called atoms. However, in Hebrews 11:3, we see that creation is made of invisible elements.
I'm not sure how Dutko can equate invisible elements with atoms. Indeed, the passage he is referencing from the New Testament book of Hebrews is part of a larger context, speaking of faith. The opening verse to the chapter reads, "Faith is a substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." And then the writer goes on to describe the creation of the earth from unseen things. However, the Greek word here is phino, and in no sense refers to the Greek notion of atoms. Indeed, it was around 450 BCE when Democritus coined the term atomos, and so the word for atom already existed by the time Hebrews was written. If that were the intent of the passage from Hebrews, as Dutko asserts, why didn't the writer just use it? The answer, of course, is clear. That's not what he meant. The writer of Hebrews had no more the idea of atoms when he wrote that verse than did the writer of Job have the idea of gravity as a force holding the earth in its place.
At the time Jesus walked the earth and the disciples, the conventional wisdom was that all the stars that we see in the sky were the same. However, we see in 1 Corinthians 15:41 that each star is different. And of course, we know that now to be true.
Anyone standing out on a starry night can plainly see that the stars are different. Some are brighter, some are dimmer, some are clustered together, some are lone wanderers. What exactly does the passage from 1 Corinthians 15:41 mean, however, when it speaks of differences between the stars? It certainly isn't talking about things like red giants or yellow dwarfs, but something called glory. And this glory exists in varying degrees in all things, both heavenly and terrestrial. According to the Oxford Bible Commentary on this passage, quote, "In antiquity, the stars and planets were generally considered to be living matter, with a constitution much more glorious and ethereal than that of earthbound creatures. Paul is thus suggesting that a resurrection body could be a body of a much higher order than our present physical condition, though the point hardly works for us, who know that the stars are not a different order of creation, but as physical, material, and destructible as ourselves."
At the time Ecclesiastes was written in the Bible, the common understanding of the day was that winds blew in a straight line. No one had any idea that there were things such as cyclones. There wasn't Doppler radar. There wasn't satellite images. No one knew. wind blew in cyclones. It was assumed that it blew straight. However, Ecclesiastes 1 verse 6 says that winds blow in cyclones.
But that isn't what Ecclesiastes 1:6 says. It merely states, "The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits." However, in meteorology, a cyclone is an area of closed circular motion rotating in the same direction as the Earth. You'll see this as an inward spiraling of winds that rotate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. That isn't exactly what Ecclesiastes is stating. Besides, it also isn't clear to me how this is such an amazing, God-only given observation. Don't they have dust devils in the Mideast in which the wind can be seen to swirl?
Holy crap!
You know, at the time Leviticus was written, the common wisdom of the day, common science and medicine of the day, was that sick people needed to be bled. That's right, that if you were sick, the best thing to do was to remove blood from that person. That's why they used to leech people, drain their blood. Of course, we know now that blood is the source of life and health. And guess what? In Leviticus 17:11, it says that blood is the source of life and health. How do they know that then?
Because, guess what? You shoot a person with an arrow or hack his arm off with a sword and let all the blood drain out of him, and he's gonna die. Don't need a god to tell you that.
At the time Samuel was written, 1st and 2nd Samuel, the common understanding of the day was that the ocean floor was flat. Yet, of course, today we know that the ocean floor contains deep valleys and mountains. Guess what? 2 Samuel 22:16 says that the ocean floor contains deep valleys and mountains.
What evidence does Dutko give that ancients believed the ocean floors were completely flat? What prevented one from inferring that what one saw above sea level, mountains and valleys, also existed below sea level? But what does 2 Samuel 22:16 really say? Does it talk about mountains and valleys? It says, "And the channels of the sea appeared, the foundations of the world were discovered," in the King James Version. Interesting, but hardly a topographical map of the undersea floor, complete with ocean ridges and trenches. What's more interesting about this passage is the claim that the earth has foundations. Foundations? And just earlier, Dutko had used the book of Job to argue that the world hung on nothing. Maybe he meant the world and its foundations were just floating out there somewhere.
At the time the book of Job was written, the conventional understanding of the day was that the oceans were fed only by rivers and rain. In Job chapter 38 verse 16, we're told that the ocean contains springs. How did they know all of this stuff back then if it weren't for God?
We don't really know what the author of Job is trying to imply. The JPS Tanakh actually renders the verse as sources of the sea rather than springs. The Hebrew word from Job translated springs is used only here and nowhere else, so it's impossible to know its proper meaning. However, many other Hebrew words in far less ambiguous contexts are used for water springs, which makes the word from Job even more suspect. Skeptics do not assume supernaturalism the way apologists and creationists do when reading the verse. Such a supernatural bias is necessary if we are to believe the verse is referring to deep sea vents, like those found along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. But this is just another tactic employed by all apologists. They read more into the text than what the text alone allows. They need to provide not just more evidence, but any evidence for their assertions besides their mere say-so. They cannot operate in the clear light of a plain reading of the text, but must lurk instead in the darkened recesses of ambiguity and make their fortunes on the gullibility of their faithful audience members. The tactic fails, however, with skeptics. Skeptics require more than mere desire to be convinced of the apologist's position.